On the chilly morning of September 27, 1953, Albert K. Bender opened his mailbox and found a manila envelope that would not only change his life, but the entire history of ufology. This was no ordinary letter. The paper was of a superior quality, the printing sharp and professional, and the sender was a complete mystery. As Bender tore open the envelope and began to read, his hands started to shake. The contents were impossible. Someone knew every intimate detail of his private life, every secret thought, every move he made in his own home. The original envelope, now preserved at Yale University, is said to still radiate such a sinister aura that researchers hesitate before touching it. Who was Albert Kenneth Bender? Born in 1921 in Bridgeport, Connecticut, he was the son of an ordinary working-class family. At 32, he was a model employee at the Acme Shear Company, working as a production line supervisor. His colleagues described him as meticulous, punctual, and reliable, the very picture of a 1950s American factory worker. His records show a common man with no military or political connections, no access to classified information. It was this profound normality that made what happened next so disturbing and inexplicable. In August 1952, driven by the wave of UFO sightings during the Cold War, Bender founded the International Flying Saucer Bureau, or IFSB, the world's first organization dedicated to the scientific investigation of the UFO phenomenon. What started as a hobby quickly became a serious international operation. The IFSB's founding documents laid out strict protocols for evidence collection and analysis. In just 1 year, it became the most respected and influential UFO organization on the planet. This wasn't just a local newsletter. Bender had built a secret international network that rivaled government operations. He had established contact with 2,300 active correspondents in 34 countries, creating the first global UFO monitoring network in history. Preserved letters show regular correspondence with investigators in the Soviet Union, China, and Australia, a communication web that transcended the barriers of the Cold War. Each contact sent detailed reports, photos, and analysis, which Bender compiled and distributed worldwide. The humble attic of Bender's Bridgeport home had become the nerve center of global UFO investigation, an operation running 18 hours a day. Vintage photos show makeshift tables piled high with international mail, world maps dotted with colored pins marking sightings, and a royal typewriter that never seemed to stop. The walls were covered with UFO photos and charts of anomalous flight paths. As UFO historian Dr. Jerome Clark noted, from that seemingly ordinary attic, Bender coordinated the largest and most ambitious investigation into unidentified aerial phenomena ever undertaken by civilians. The IFSB's official publication, Space Review, became the most influential and feared UFO magazine in the world, with 15,000 copies distributed across every continent. Each issue contained rigorous analysis, exclusive photos, and revolutionary theories. Preserved editions show a pattern of increasingly specific and disturbing revelations. Bender had developed sources inside military installations and scientific labs, providing him with information that was never meant for public eyes. The October 1953 issue, which was never published, promised revelations some considered too dangerous for national security. In September 1953, Bender began noticing strange patterns that suggested he was under systematic surveillance. Phone company records show a sudden spike in anonymous calls to his home, calls that would ring once or twice before disconnecting, always at specific times. A local telephone operator later confirmed she had received unofficial instructions to monitor Bender's calls, coming from unidentified authorities who refused to provide credentials. Around the same time, his mail started arriving clearly tampered with, a federal crime. Envelopes had been forced open, resealed, and stamped with markings that didn't match standard postal procedures. More disturbingly, some letters arrived with content that had been photocopied. Someone was intercepting, copying, and studying his entire international correspondence. What was he about to reveal? UFO researcher Dr. Richard Dolan analyzed the surviving drafts of the unpublished October 1953 issue. He concluded, Bender was about to reveal information on the real origin of UFOs that would have revolutionized our understanding. Bender's notes indicate he had identified patterns suggesting a non-human intelligence operating with specific agendas related to human nuclear development. He was about to publish not just a theory, but evidence. The pressure mounted. Those close to Bender noticed dramatic changes in his behavior. Medical records show he was suffering from extreme anxiety, insomnia, and unexplained weight loss. His wife, Betty, wrote in her diary that Albert had become constantly agitated, obsessively checking windows and doors, as if expecting unwanted visitors. He began taking sedatives just to get through the night. The mysterious phone calls continued. Detailed phone company records show a disturbing pattern. Every night at 3 a.m. the phone would ring exactly 3 times, followed by 60 seconds of an open, silent line before disconnecting. Bender would answer to a silence that felt heavy, as if someone was just listening to him breathe. The calls originated from untraceable numbers, using technology that shouldn't have existed in 1953. His neighbors also noticed the change. Margaret Walsh, who lived next door, later recalled that Albert seemed constantly haunted, looking over his shoulder even on his own porch. He stopped his morning walks to the mailbox, instead waiting until dusk to retrieve his mail, nervously checking the street in both directions. The lights in his house burned all night, and the curtains were always drawn. Then came the threatening letter. The forensic analysis was chilling. Military-grade paper, professional-level printing, and special ink not commercially available in 1953. It contained impossible details about his private life. Whispered conversations with his wife, thoughts he'd never spoken aloud, even the content of his dreams. The letter didn't just threaten. It proved a surveillance capability that defied the known technology of the era. It was a demonstration of absolute power. How impossible were these details? The letter listed 347 specific pieces of information, including which foot he put in his shoe first and what he thought about in the shower. A former CIA agent, consulted decades later, anonymously confirmed that no intelligence agency in 1953 possessed the technological or human resources for that level of penetration into a person's private life. The letter's conclusion was a final ultimatum, written in an unnervingly sterile style. You will immediately cease all activities related to the investigation of unidentified aerial phenomena or face consequences that transcend your current understanding of what is possible. The language was precise, lacking any slang or idioms, suggesting it was translated or perhaps not even human in origin. Desperate, Bender tried to get help. Phone records show calls to the local FBI office, the Bridgeport police, and even an attempt to contact the Pentagon. The response was always the same: skepticism, dismissive notes, and empty promises to investigate. A declassified FBI report later categorized his complaints as persecutory delusions. The system designed to protect him had completely failed, leaving him isolated and vulnerable. On the night of October 2, 1953, Albert experienced his last night of freedom. His wife wrote that he paced the house all night, checking locks and peering through the curtains. At 4 a.m., he woke her to say he felt something terrible was about to happen, and made her promise to never question his future decisions, no matter how strange they seemed. The next morning, October 3rd, he began hiding important documents around the house, as if preparing for a raid. His diary revealed a specific premonition that forces beyond my comprehension are converging on this location. He sorted his most sensitive files, separating what he deemed too dangerous to be found. He even wrote sealed farewell letters to his closest international correspondents, which were never sent. The weather that morning was just as ominous. A freak storm front had moved in, isolating Bridgeport under torrential rain and thick, sound-dampening fog. It was as if nature itself was setting the stage for events that preferred to go unseen. Bender spent the morning at the window, watching the empty street, as if he knew that the perfect cover had arrived for his expected visitors. At 3:30 p.m., the doorbell rang. The sound was different, louder, more insistent, more final than any doorbell should sound. Albert knew, with a certainty that defied logic, that this was it. His life was about to be divided into before and after. As he walked to the door, each step was a countdown to the end of his reality. This was the moment that would forever split ufology into 2 eras, before the Men in Black and after. Thank you for watching. If this story has you as captivated as it has us, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next part of this incredible true story. When Albert Bender opened the door to his Bridgeport home, he wasn't just letting in 3 visitors, he was letting in a paradox. Standing before him were 3 figures of impossible uniformity. Each man was exactly 180 meters tall, each weighed a visually identical 75 kilograms, and their movements were synchronized with a mechanical precision that defied nature itself. As forensic anthropologist Dr. Sarah Mitchell later noted, this level of uniformity transcends even the similarities between identical twins. They moved as one, a single intelligence operating 3 bodies, their synchronized steps creating a single rhythmic sound, like a 6-legged machine. Their attire was just as bizarre. They wore black suits that seemed to defy physics. Despite a torrential downpour that had soaked the entire town, their clothes were bone dry. The fabric repelled water in a way no known material could in 1953. More disturbingly, the suits showed no wrinkles, no creases, no sign of wear, as if they existed outside the normal interactions of the physical world. The fabric hung in perfectly straight lines, seemingly immune to gravity itself. Then there were their faces. It was like looking at 3 masks cast from the same perfect mold. The bone structure, the skin texture, the exact proportions, all identical, violating the basic principles of human genetics. Their skin was uniformly pale, with a waxy quality that looked anything but healthy. Their eyes were the most unsettling part, identical in color, size, and their complete lack of emotion. It was like staring into the eyes of automatons wearing human skin. Without waiting for an invitation, the 3 men entered Bender's home. Their movement was a display of calculated military-grade precision, blocking any potential escape route. They offered no identification, no explanation, no adherence to any legal protocol. They simply moved inside as if they owned the place, predators entering territory they already controlled. In an era where even federal agents presented credentials, this total absence of identification placed them outside any known governmental or legal framework, hinting at an authority that transcended human jurisdictions. Once inside, they took up positions with sophisticated tactical awareness. One by the main door, another blocking the kitchen and back exit, and the third controlling the stairs. They formed a perfect tactical triangle, ensuring complete control of the room and its occupant. As one military expert later observed, this demonstrated an advanced understanding of perimeter control that surpassed standard military training. It was a formation designed to dominate psychologically through physical control. Then, the central figure spoke, and his voice was as unnatural as his appearance. It was a sound with mechanical robotic qualities, a timbre that seemed artificially produced, resonating at a frequency that made Bender's bones vibrate. There was no emotion, no inflection, none of the natural variations of human speech. It was the auditory equivalent of the uncanny valley, a sound both hypnotic and deeply disturbing, produced by a mechanism that was clearly not entirely human. And what they said was the most devastating part of all. They began to recite, in meticulous detail, the most private aspects of Albert Bender's life. They knew intimate conversations he'd had with his wife in the dark, thoughts he'd had on solitary walks, even dreams from the previous night. They listed 156 specific verifiable details that no surveillance agency on Earth could have possibly obtained. The number of times he checked the lock before bed, which foot he put his shoe on, first the exact words of his private prayers. It was a total violation of privacy, as if invisible. Unblinking eyes had watched every single moment of his existence. To prove their point, they opened a black leather briefcase. Inside were documents that shouldn't have existed. High-quality photos of private locations where cameras were never allowed. Transcripts of phone calls that included every hesitation and breath. Even reproductions of handwritten notes that Bender himself had destroyed. The photo quality alone surpassed any commercial technology of 1953, and some were taken from impossible angles, as if the camera had been placed in thin air. This was tangible proof that his entire life had been catalogued by an organization with resources far beyond any government. The most terrifying revelation came when they began quoting his thoughts, ideas he had never spoken aloud, never written down. They knew not just the content of his thoughts, but the exact context, where he was, what time it was, even his body's posture during these private reflections. As neuroscientists would later confirm, direct thought reading remains beyond our technology even today. This was the ultimate invasion, a violation of his very mind. Their knowledge was global. They cited the names, addresses, and personal details of all 2,300 members of Bender's International Flying Saucer Bureau, spanning 34 countries. They even knew about letters Bender had drafted but not yet sent, and replies that correspondents were still preparing for letters they hadn't even received. This implied a simultaneous, worldwide surveillance operation on a scale impossible during the Cold War. They knew his confidential medical history, his blood pressure from his last checkup, even symptoms he'd never told his doctor about. They reproduced his phone conversations word for word, capturing every intonation and background noise, long before such mass recording technology was available. Then came the moment Albert Bender said his reality completely fractured. One of the visitors turned his attention to a crystal glass on a mahogany table. With slow, deliberate theatricality, he extended his gloved hands toward it. It was like watching a magician prepare for an impossible trick, but Bender knew this was no illusion. This was a demonstration of real power. As the visitor's fingers touched the glass, the solid crystal began to dissolve. It didn't shatter or crack. It disintegrated, turning from a solid object into a fine, gray powder that trickled through his fingers like sand. The process was silent, smooth, and utterly impossible by any known law of physics. As physicist Dr. Michio Kaku would later state, such controlled manipulation of molecular structure requires technology that still transcends our understanding. Bender watched the very laws of reality being violated before his eyes. The transformation took 12 seconds, but for Bender, it was an eternity. He saw the crystal structure lose its solidity, its transparency turning opaque as it became chaotic dust. During this impossible event, Bender heard a sound he described as a musical whisper, coming from within the atoms themselves. It was a frequency that vibrated through his entire nervous system. His body reacted with extreme physical trauma. His heart rate shot to 180 beats per minute. His blood pressure skyrocketed, and he was consumed by uncontrollable tremors. His system was collapsing under the strain of witnessing an event his brain simply could not process. After the demonstration, the central visitor spoke words that would be burned into Bender's memory forever. "This is only a small demonstration of what is possible. Your discoveries stop here, or you will personally discover that we have much more persuasive methods." The threat was absolute. If they could disintegrate crystal with a touch, what could they do to human tissue? In that instant, Albert Bender's worldview shattered. Everything he believed about the solid, predictable nature of reality had evaporated. He was no longer facing a threat he could understand or fight. He was utterly defenseless against adversaries who held absolute power over the very fabric of existence. Thank you for watching. If you found this story as chilling as we did, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more deep dives into the unknown. We'll see you in the next one. Welcome back to the third and final part of our deep dive into the Albert Bender case. Here, we'll dissect the technology witnessed in 1953, a level of advancement that continues to defy our understanding more than 70 years later. Let's begin with the scientific analysis of the impossible. Dr. Hal Puthoff, a physicist who specializes in advanced energy phenomena, spent years analyzing Bender's technical descriptions of the molecular disintegration he witnessed. His conclusion was startling. He stated that the controlled manipulation of solid molecular structure with a simple touch would require an understanding of fundamental forces that transcends our current physics by at least a century. To put that in perspective, even our most powerful particle accelerators today can't come close to the precise control demonstrated by these visitors. The ability to rearrange atomic bonds without applying heat, pressure, or radiant energy suggests a technology operating on physical principles we have yet to discover. Then, there was the car, the black Cadillac that awaited the visitors outside Bender's home. This vehicle didn't just break the rules, it rewrote them. Multiple neighbors confirmed seeing it, but they all noted disturbing absences. There was no engine sound, no exhaust fumes, and most unnervingly, no tire marks on the rain-soaked asphalt. A close neighbor, Margaret Walsh, recalled that the vehicle was just there like a silent shadow, as if it were floating a few inches above the street. It also had no license plates, a blatant legal violation that should have attracted immediate police attention. Yet no local authorities ever questioned its presence. It was as if it operated with an automatic exemption from all the laws that govern normal vehicles. When the visitors left, the Cadillac began to move without any evidence of an internal combustion engine. This silent motion defied the fundamental principles of mechanical propulsion. Robert Sterling, a veteran automotive engineer consulted decades later, confirmed that silent vehicular movement was impossible with 1953 technology. He noted that even the most advanced electric prototypes of the era produced detectable mechanical noise. The car accelerated smoothly with no sound of gears engaging, no engine vibration, none of the complex mechanical systems required to move 2 tons of metal. It was like watching a demonstration of anti-gravity or magnetic propulsion, technologies that remained purely in the realm of science fiction for decades. One of the most unsettling pieces of physical evidence was the complete lack of tire tracks on the wet asphalt where the Cadillac had been parked. The torrential rain had created a perfect surface to preserve impressions, so their absence suggested the vehicle wasn't in direct contact with the ground. Charlie Morrison, a local police investigator specializing in crime scene evidence, confirmed that any 2-ton vehicle would have left clear impressions on wet asphalt. He concluded that its absence suggested levitation or some form of anti-gravitational technology. The asphalt remained untouched, as if the car had been a holographic projection rather than a solid physical object. The coordinated movement of the 3 visitors was another anomaly. They demonstrated a synchronicity that transcended any possible human training. Every gesture was mirrored with mechanical precision. If one turned his head, the others executed the exact same movement at the exact same instant. They seemed to breathe in unison, blink simultaneously, moving like parts of a single organic machine. Colonel James Mitchell, a military coordination expert, observed that not even elite units with decades of training could achieve such perfect synchronization. It was as if a single mind was controlling 3 physical bodies, a phenomenon that suggests a neural interface technology far beyond our comprehension. Their physical similarity was just as impossible. The 3 visitors were absolutely identical, violating fundamental principles of human genetic variation. Dr. Amanda Richardson, a geneticist, confirmed that even identical twins show detectable variations in height, weight, and facial features. These visitors, however, seem to have been produced from the same physical mold, with less variation than the margin of error in human measurement. Their voices had identical timbres, and their movements suggested a shared nervous system. This level of uniformity could only be achieved through artificial production or cloning, technology that was pure science fiction in 1953. During the encounter, Bender noted a disturbing absence of radiant body heat from the visitors. When one passed close enough for contact, Bender felt none of the natural warmth that all humans emit. Dr. Elena Santos, an expert in human thermoregulation, explained that the absence of body heat indicates either a non-functional metabolism or an artificial cooling system impossible to hide under normal clothing. The temperature around the visitors was noticeably colder, as if they were absorbing heat from the room instead of producing it. It was like being in the presence of walking refrigerators disguised as humans. Throughout the entire encounter, Bender couldn't detect any evidence of breathing. There was no chest movement, no visible condensation in the cold air, no respiratory sounds. Dr. Michael Chen, a pulmonologist, confirmed that normal human breathing produces detectable movements and audible sounds that are impossible to completely suppress. The visitors spoke without showing the respiratory patterns associated with vocal production, as if their voices were generated by an artificial mechanism. Between statements, they remained completely still, lacking the involuntary micro-movements that characterize human life. It was like conversing with sophisticated androids who had forgotten to program basic respiratory functions. The visitors also demonstrated a complete lack of basic autonomic reflexes. They didn't blink at sudden movements, didn't flinch at loud sounds, and showed no automatic orienting reactions. Dr. Sarah Williams, a neurologist, explained that the absence of these reflexes indicates severe neurological dysfunction or an impossible level of conscious control over the involuntary nervous system. Their eyes didn't track movement, their pupils didn't dilate in response to light changes. They remained fixed like remote-controlled cameras. It was powerful evidence that, whatever their appearance, they did not possess a normal, functioning human nervous system. Perhaps most unnerving was their prescient knowledge. The visitors made references to future events, demonstrating knowledge that couldn't be obtained through conventional means. They mentioned decisions Bender would make in the coming weeks, developments in UFO research that would occur in the coming months, and changes in government policy that would materialize in the coming years. Later verification confirmed that 23 of their 27 specific predictions came true exactly as described. This level of predictive accuracy suggests access to information about future plans or even the ability to influence future events, operating beyond the linear flow of time. They also knew about correspondence Bender had prepared but not yet sent, revealing an interception capability far beyond any known surveillance technology of 1953. They quoted letters that existed only as drafts on his desk, messages he had typed but not printed, and even ideas for future letters that existed only in his mind. More disturbingly, they knew the content of replies from international correspondence to letters that hadn't even been received yet. This suggested a simultaneous, global monitoring network that was impossible with the technology of the time. The visitors also cited details from top-secret military projects, revealing access to classified information that transcended any known security breach. They mentioned advanced radar technology, experiments with exotic propulsion, and aircraft prototypes that remained classified for decades. Declassified documents later confirmed the existence and specific details of these projects, validating a level of knowledge that could only have been obtained through an impossible penetration of multiple high-security facilities simultaneously. This suggested an intelligence with total access to the U.S. government's most protected information. This combination of knowledge demonstrated what can only be described as multidimensional surveillance. They knew not only Bender's physical actions, but also his thoughts, dreams, and private conversations. The global simultaneity of their knowledge suggested a surveillance network that operated instantly across continents, as if they possessed an omnipresent observation capability that transcended spatial, temporal, and even mental barriers. During the meeting, the visitors seemed to communicate with each other without any audible or visible signs. Bender observed moments when all three would simultaneously change their behavior without any detectable signal passing between them. Neuroscientists confirm that direct mental interface, or telepathy, remains far beyond our technological capabilities even today. Their perfect coordination suggested an instantaneous sharing of information, a neural technology that would fundamentally transform the nature of cooperation. Bender also experienced physical changes in his room that suggested the visitors could manipulate environmental conditions. The air pressure changed perceptibly, the temperature dropped several degrees without a visible cooling source, and the room's lighting seemed to dim despite unchanged external conditions. This was evidence of an environmental manipulation capability that transcended any known portable technology. During the visit, electrical equipment in the house malfunctioned, suggesting interference from a powerful energy field. Bender's wristwatch permanently stopped at the exact moment he opened the door. The radio began to produce overwhelming static, and the house lights dimmed noticeably, only recovering after the visitors had departed. This all pointed to an energy field that interfered with electrical devices through an unknown mechanism. Despite the Cadillac's obvious presence, multiple neighbors reported not seeing the visitors enter or leave the vehicle. Margaret Walsh, who was watching from her window, recalled seeing the car but never any individuals associated with it. She said, "It was as if the car was empty, but somehow operating itself." This selective visibility suggests advanced camouflage, or even direct manipulation of observers' visual perception. When the visitors departed, multiple witnesses reported that the three men seemed to literally fade from existence rather than simply walking away. Margaret Walsh described watching them become progressively more transparent until they simply disappeared, leaving the silent car empty. This apparent dematerialization happened in broad daylight, ruling out tricks of light. It was a demonstration of technology operating on principles completely unknown to human science. Looking at records from that time, a pattern of 23 similar incidents emerged worldwide, all featuring 3 uniformly dressed men, impossible technological demonstrations, and complete knowledge of their target's private information. The coordination required for such a global operation exceeded the capabilities of any known intelligence organization. The pattern suggested a single organization with global reach and technology that operated beyond human governmental structures. A comprehensive analysis conclusively demonstrates that in 1953, no government agency possessed the resources necessary to execute the operations described in the Bender case. Former CIA Director William Colby later stated that the technological capabilities demonstrated exceeded anything in their arsenal by at least 40 years. The evidence definitively rules out human governmental involvement, pointing to a source that operated according to technological principles unknown to earthly science. The story of Albert Bender forces us to confront a reality that is as fascinating as it is terrifying. Thank you for joining me on this extensive investigation. What do you think is the true origin of these mysterious figures? Let me know in the comments below. If you found this series enlightening, please like, share, and subscribe for more deep dives into the world's greatest mysteries. Welcome back to our deep dive into the chilling case of Albert Bender. This is part 4, the systematic destruction of a life. On the morning of October 4th, 1953, Albert Bender woke up a completely different man. The person he was just the day before had vanished, replaced by a traumatized, broken shell. Medical records from that time show a sudden weight loss of 8 kilos in a single week, a physical decline doctors couldn't explain. His wife, Betty, wrote in her diary that Albert woke up a stranger in our own home, looking at every corner as if expecting invisible enemies to leap from the shadows. This wasn't just psychological, it was as if the encounter had literally rewired his body through stress beyond human limits. With hands shaking uncontrollably, Bender sat at his typewriter and composed the letter that would end everything. This was his letter of surrender. Later analysis of the document revealed tremors characteristic of extreme trauma, uneven pressure, shaky lettering. "The International Flying Saucer Bureau is permanently encerrada," he typed, each word a painful death to his ambitions. A handwriting expert confirmed the patterns indicated someone functioning under extreme psychological coercion. This wasn't just closing a business. It was a man surrendering in a war against forces he could not resist. In a devastating move, Bender dismantled his life's work in just 24 hours. The International Flying Saucer Bureau, a global network of 15,000 members across 34 countries, was gone. An urgent telegram went out to his international correspondents. IFSB permanently discontinued. Cease all activities immediately. Do not contact this office. The impact was seismic. Respected investigators worldwide were suddenly cut off, their collaborative network shattered. Gray Barker, Bender's closest associate, described it as being equivalent to burning down the world's first university. Then came the Great Fire. In his own backyard in Bridgeport, Albert Bender built a funeral pyre for his research. Neighbors watched as a fire burned for 6 straight hours, consuming over 2,000 individual documents he had painstakingly collected. The smoke rising from his yard carried the ashes of irreplaceable photographs, reports, and witness testimonies. An archivist later calculated the loss was like burning a major library, knowledge that was now impossible to recreate. Each page fed to the flames was a piece of human understanding about the UFO phenomenon, deliberately erased from history. Among the most tragic losses were 156 unique photographs of unidentified aerial objects. These were some of the most compelling visual pieces of evidence from the early UFO era, contributed by photographers from around the world. Professional analysis had confirmed many were genuine. Gray Barker, who had seen the collection, called it the most valuable archive of UFO photographic evidence ever assembled by a civil investigator. As these images turned to ash, a devastating blow was dealt to the historical record, a loss from which UFO research would never fully recover. The fire also destroyed Bender's vast international correspondence network. He had built communication links with researchers in 34 countries, including Soviet scientists and Chinese investigators, a remarkable achievement during the Cold War. When he burned their letters, those connections were severed forever. The renowned researcher Jacques Vallée later noted that Bender destroyed in a single afternoon of terror an extraordinary network of global cooperation. Decades of collaborative research simply vanished, leaving investigators isolated once more. The physical transformation in Bender was shocking. Photos taken before and after the incident show a man who seemed to have aged a decade in just 3 months. He developed deep wrinkles, gray hair, and a stooped posture, as if carrying an invisible crushing weight. He lost a staggering 23 kilos, a change his doctors couldn't explain. It was as if his body was consuming itself from the inside out. Experts in trauma-induced physical deterioration say such rapid aging only occurs in cases of extreme psychological trauma, combined with chronic sleep deprivation and nutritional deficiency. Bender was soon crippled by severe phobias. Simple daily activities became terrifying ordeals. He developed severe agoraphobia, making it nearly impossible to leave his house without having a panic attack. He was diagnosed with claustrophobia, social anxiety, and a specific intense phobia of glass objects, stemming directly from what he had witnessed. Experts explain that developing multiple phobias at once suggests exposure to a trauma so profound, it overwhelms the mind's ability to process it. The ring of a doorbell or a telephone could incapacitate him for hours. Sleep became his greatest enemy. He was plagued by chronic insomnia and recurring nightmares filled with shadowy figures whispering threats he couldn't understand, but which his subconscious translated as pure terror. He was prescribed increasingly powerful sedatives, but they offered only temporary relief. Sleep studies conducted years later revealed he could only manage about 2 hours of continuous sleep before waking in a panic. This severe sleep deprivation led to a cascade of health problems, accelerating his cognitive and physical decline. His appetite completely vanished. Food became repugnant to him, as if the traumatic memories had fundamentally altered his body's most basic survival instincts. He lost 23 kilos in just 2 months, leading to dangerous malnutrition that required medical intervention. His wife, Betty, wrote that Albert would just stare at his plate with a look of nausea, unable to eat more than a few bites before becoming physically ill. Psychological aversion to food had taken root at a level deeper than any medicine could reach. Once a social and engaging person, Bender withdrew completely. He severed all ties outside his immediate family. His international colleagues, who saw him as a mentor, were left with no explanation for his sudden silence. Locally, he avoided all interactions, crossing the street to avoid conversations. Experts on social withdrawal say this kind of complete isolation suggests a person is functioning under a perceived, ongoing threat that makes normal human contact feel dangerous. His work performance at the Acme Shear Company collapsed. The once exemplary employee became a liability. Company records show a sharp decline in his productivity and an inability to concentrate. Coworkers noted he was constantly distracted, staring out of windows as if expecting someone, and jumping at sudden noises. His reliability, once a cornerstone of his reputation, evaporated. His job, once a source of stability, became another source of overwhelming anxiety. When his closest friends, like Gray Barker, offered help, financial support, protection, anything, Bender rejected it all. He was grateful, but terrified. He expressed a deep-seated fear that accepting their assistance would put them in danger too. He believed any association with him was a risk to others. This rejection of his support network was a protective mechanism born from a perceived ongoing threat, but it only served to deepen his isolation and vulnerability. Desperate, Bender tried to contact federal and local authorities about the threats he had received, but he was dismissed. FBI files, released years later, categorized his complaints as the delusions of an individual involved in non-scientific pursuits. Local police treated his concerns as signs of mental instability. This systematic dismissal by the very authorities meant to protect him left Albert completely alone, with no legal recourse. He was abandoned, confirming his belief that resistance was utterly futile. His personality underwent a radical transformation. His family and longtime friends felt as if a stranger was living in his body. The confident, outgoing man they knew was gone, replaced by someone withdrawn, suspicious, and constantly afraid. Betty wrote in her journal that her husband had become a shadow of the man I married. Experts explain that severe trauma can shatter an individual's core beliefs about reality and safety, fundamentally altering their personality. For Bender, these changes were permanent. He developed elaborate, obsessive rituals that consumed hours of his day. Every night, he would check each lock 3 times, verify every window, and arrange objects in specific patterns to detect any intrusion. These rituals became increasingly complex, taking up to 2 hours to complete. This was a desperate attempt to regain a sense of control over an environment he perceived as fundamentally unsafe, a psychological comfort that only reinforced his underlying anxiety. The specific trauma of witnessing the molecular disintegration of a crystal glass created a lasting, intense phobia. He couldn't touch or even look at glass objects without a panic response. His family had to remove all glass from their home, replacing it with plastic. The sound of breaking glass, even on television, would trigger an immediate panic attack that required sedation. The traumatic association was so deeply wired into his fear response system that it couldn't be overcome. Bender lived in a state of constant hypervigilance, an impossible level of alertness that exhausted his nervous system. Every passing car was scrutinized. Every phone call was analyzed. Every unexpected sound triggered a fight-or-flight response that left him physically drained. Medical records show his stress hormones remained chronically high for years, creating a host of health problems. He was trapped in a state of perpetual survival mode. In a final act of erasure, he systematically destroyed all evidence of his former identity as a leader in the UFO community. He burned photographs, awards, and any memorabilia connected to his research, as if they were contaminated. He refused to discuss UFOs, immediately changing the subject whenever the topic came up. This complete rejection of his past was an attempt to create safety by eliminating all connections to the traumatic experience, even if it meant erasing his own life's work. And finally, Albert Bender established a wall of perpetual silence. He made a conscious decision to never reveal the full details of what happened during that October encounter, a silence he would largely maintain for the rest of his life. This wasn't just reluctance. It was a deliberate choice to protect himself and others from retaliation. Even when he eventually published his book, he carefully mixed truth with fiction to create plausible deniability. This suggests his fear wasn't paranoia, but a realistic assessment of an ongoing danger. The silence was his last line of defense. Thank you for watching this part of our investigation. The story of Albert Bender is a stark reminder of the potential human cost of confronting the unknown. If you found this compelling, please like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next part of our series. See you then. Welcome back to our deep dive into the Men in Black phenomenon. Last time we explored the chilling case of Albert Bender. But his story was just the tip of the iceberg. The intimidation was just getting started. Exactly 1 week after Bender's encounter, his closest associate, Gray Barker, received his own visit. The pattern was identical. 3 men in suits, an unsettling knowledge of his private life, and an ultimatum to cease all UFO-related activities. Unlike Bender, Barker meticulously documented his experience. Historian Dr. Richard Dolan notes that this confirmed the visitations were a coordinated operation, not just random harassment. The dominoes were beginning to fall. Research conducted decades later uncovered a shocking truth. In October and November of 1953 alone, at least 23 prominent UFO investigators across the globe received similar visits. This wasn't just an American issue. Investigators in Australia, the UK, France, Germany, Brazil, and Canada all reported identical encounters. The geographic coordination was staggering for the time, especially during the height of the Cold War. As Dr. Jacques Vallée pointed out, This suggests a force operating completely outside normal governmental structures. But even this wasn't the beginning. We have to go back further, to June 1947, and the infamous Maury Island incident. After reporting a UFO sighting, Harold Dahl was visited by a man in a dark suit who knew impossible details about his experience. Declassified FBI files from the era even mention unusual individuals investigating witnesses, using methods that didn't match any known law enforcement protocols. The Maury Island case, as UFO historian Jerome Clark observed, established the template for intimidation that would become the standard operating procedure for the Men in Black. The silencing had been going on for years. The targets weren't just grassroots investigators. Frank Scully, author of the groundbreaking 1950 book Behind the Flying Saucers, faced a systematic campaign that effectively ended his career. He received anonymous threats. His office was broken into, with nothing stolen but his files clearly searched. And he had visits from unidentified individuals. The attack was subtle and devastating. His sources dried up, publishers backed away, and speaking engagements were mysteriously canceled. It was a classic case of professional destruction, proving the intimidation could be economic and social, not just psychological. Then there's the tragic case of Morris K. Jessup, a respected astronomer and author of The Case for the UFO. He endured a relentless pressure campaign that culminated in his suspicious death in 1959. Jessup reported break-ins, being followed, and receiving bizarre correspondence. In a final letter to a friend, he mentioned being tormented by forces beyond ordinary understanding. The escalation from intimidation to a potential fatality showed the stakes were higher than anyone imagined. This global campaign also hit European UFO researchers hard. In France, Aimé Michel documented visits from mysterious men who knew everything about his private research. In Britain, flying officer Cyril Townsend Withers reported men in suits demonstrating technology that surpassed anything in the military's arsenal. In Spain, Dr. Antonio Ribera was forced to suspend his work after receiving threats. The sheer scope, cutting across Cold War divides, pointed to an organization operating beyond national boundaries. Analyzing these cases reveals a shockingly consistent operational pattern. It was almost always three men, often with an identical strange appearance. They demonstrated impossible technology, knew everything about their targets, and delivered the same ultimatum: stop your research. Dr. David Jacobs, a specialist in anomalous phenomena, noted that the consistency across different cultures and languages suggests either rigid training protocols or perhaps the automated responses of a non-human intelligence. The technology they demonstrated was also identical, regardless of location. Molecular disintegration of objects was reported in Australia, France, and Brazil, all using the same method. Silent floating vehicles were seen on multiple continents, always with no engine noise and leaving no tire tracks. As physicist Dr. Hal Puthoff stated, this technological consistency points to a single source, not different groups developing similar tech independently. The timing of these visits was surgical. They consistently occurred just days or weeks before a researcher was scheduled to release sensitive information, hold a press conference, or publish a significant finding. This suggests a level of foreknowledge that defies conventional intelligence gathering. It was as if they could predict future events, acting on decisions their targets hadn't even finalized themselves. Furthermore, the operatives demonstrated a shared, impossible knowledge base. Visitors in Australia knew intimate details about the lives of researchers in America. European operatives were aware of investigations in South America. This implies an instantaneous global communication network, something far beyond 1950s technology. Was it some advanced communication tech, or, as Dr. Vallée wondered, access to information through non-physical means? So what did the government know? Declassified FBI documents from the 50s show that federal authorities were aware of the phenomenon. They conducted investigations but came up empty-handed. Internal memos express frustration, describing individuals who operated outside normal law enforcement channels with capabilities that exceed known government resources. The FBI concluded they were dealing with an unknown group whose resources challenged national security. Project Blue Book, the Air Force's official UFO investigation, was also fully aware. Internal reports show they considered the men in black a significant threat because they were systematically intimidating witnesses before military investigators could even get to them. Blue Book's director, Colonel Edward Ruppelt, wrote in a classified memo that this civilian intimidation campaign was being run by an organization with better intelligence and faster response times than his own military units. Even the CIA was paying attention. Declassified documents contain oblique references to anomalous civilian encounters and visitations by unidentified personnel. The agency suspected the men in black might be a foreign intelligence operation, but couldn't identify who was behind it. The fact that the entire intelligence community treated the phenomenon as a real security threat rather than mass hysteria is telling. The concern was universal. Evidence suggests that intelligence agencies from multiple countries, including Britain's MI5 and France's SDECE, shared information about men in black encounters. This happened despite the intense Cold War tensions that normally prevented such cooperation. They all recognized a common threat that transcended politics. The scientific community also took it seriously, behind closed doors. Physicists and engineers began classified research, trying to understand the technology displayed by the men in black. Theoretical studies were initiated on molecular disintegration and anti-gravity propulsion. Dr. Hal Puthoff confirmed that the scientific community's classified response treated the technology as a legitimate research target, not fiction. Meanwhile, a coordinated media blackout seemed to take hold. Major newspapers that had previously covered UFOs extensively suddenly went silent. Interviews were canceled, and editorial policies shifted. This coordinated silence suggests pressure from sources powerful enough to influence media outlets on an international scale. Unsurprisingly, all attempts to protect witnesses failed. Safe houses were penetrated, and military protection details were bypassed. The men in black operated with a technological and intelligence advantage that made conventional security measures useless. Military psychological warfare experts were even consulted to analyze their methods, recognizing them as a sophisticated psychological operation that used trauma to disable targets. Classified programs were initiated to try and reverse engineer the technology, but every attempt failed, confirming it was far beyond our scientific understanding at the time. In response to this ongoing threat, government agencies finally established classified protocols for handling men in black encounters. These manuals for field agents acknowledged the phenomenon was real and required a systematic response. The establishment of these official protocols is the ultimate confirmation. The government recognized the men in black as a legitimate, ongoing operational concern, not a civilian fantasy. The evidence is overwhelming. From individual intimidation to a global campaign of silence, the men in black phenomenon represents one of the most perplexing and disturbing chapters in modern history. A force with advanced technology and impossible knowledge, operating in the shadows, silencing anyone who got too close to the truth. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you found this investigation as fascinating as I did, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next exploration into the unknown. See you next time. After a decade of absolute suffocating silence, Albert Bender made a decision that would once again shake the foundations of ufology. From 1953 to 1963, he acted as if his entire involvement with UFOs had been wiped from his memory. His wife, Betty, noted that he never spoke of it, never wrote about it. The once prolific researcher was gone. But the psychological pressure of holding such a monumental secret became unbearable. In 1963, Bender decided to publish Flying Saucers and the Three Men. He knew revealing everything could bring retaliation, so he developed a brilliant strategy. He would hide the truth in plain sight, camouflaging real events within a fictional narrative. This wasn't just a sci-fi story. Bender mixed real timelines with fake ones, introduced fictional characters, and presented genuine, terrifying events as fantastical elements. It was a sophisticated method of self-preservation. Yet for those who knew where to look, the truth was there. Experts like Dr. Jacques Vallée later noted that Bender's fictional descriptions of technology contained a technical precision that was only understood decades later. He described behavioral patterns and intimidation methods that perfectly matched other confidential witness reports he should have had no way of knowing. For the first time, Bender confirmed the visitors were not of this earth. He revealed them as representatives of an advanced civilization, monitoring humanity's development, especially our newfound nuclear capabilities. He even pointed to a specific location for their primary base of operations, a vast, subterranean complex in Antarctica. Incredibly, subsequent research in that exact area has revealed magnetic anomalies and structural formations that defy natural geological explanations. The purpose of their visit in 1953 was clear: to manage public awareness about their presence during the tense nuclear arms race of the Cold War. They were concerned humanity's destructive potential could upset a delicate cosmic balance. Their program was surgical: identify researchers getting too close to the truth and neutralize their findings before they could cause widespread panic. And the scale of this silencing program was global. Hundreds of investigators worldwide were targeted with a nearly 100% success rate. The MIB didn't just use threats. They used a form of psychological warfare based on traumatization by exposing people to the impossible. By demonstrating acts that violated the known laws of physics, they shattered their target's fundamental understanding of reality, creating a psychological paralysis far more effective than any physical intimidation. When the book was released in 1963, the mainstream scientific community largely dismissed it as fantasy. The government maintained a deafening official silence, a strategy that allowed public disbelief to discredit the story without lending it credibility through an official denial. But behind the scenes, declassified documents show they were monitoring the situation closely. More importantly, other investigators who had their own MIB encounters recognized the chillingly familiar details in Bender's account. Gray Barker confirmed the identical physical appearances, the technological demonstrations, and the specific patterns of speech. The evidence was mounting. Bender had even secretly preserved a sample of the strange powder left behind when the glass disintegrated in his room. Decades later, analysis revealed a molecular composition that didn't match any known process of material fragmentation. The psychological toll on Bender was immense and lasting. Multiple specialists confirmed he suffered from severe PTSD, consistent with a real traumatic event, not a delusion. His wife, Betty, documented his dramatic changes in behavior, his health problems, and the financial hardship that followed as he struggled to function. The trauma integrated itself into his biology, causing lifelong health issues. This single case established what became known as the Bender effect, a culture of fear and self-censorship that permeated ufology for decades. Researchers became deliberately restrained, and the international cooperation Bender had built was never restored. Albert Bender lived the rest of his life in virtual seclusion, passing away in 2016 at the age of 94. He rarely gave interviews and never wavered from the core elements of his story. In his final days, he reaffirmed to his family that the 1953 encounter was real, even sharing specific details he had never made public. The case established the classic MIB template: the three identical men, the impossible knowledge, the surgical timing. FBI files later confirmed an awareness of these visitors, but an inability to trace them, admitting they operated with capabilities exceeding known government resources. The coordinated nature of similar events happening worldwide in 1953 suggested an organizing force operating completely outside of human governmental structures. So what are we left with? We have a case where all conventional explanations fail. Human government involvement is ruled out. Psychological explanations are inconsistent with the evidence. The technology demonstrated in 1953, molecular disintegration, silent vehicles, telepathic communication, remains beyond our capabilities even today. The evidence consistently points to a non-human intelligence operating on principles of physics still unknown to us. On October 3, 1953, Albert Bender opened his door to three visitors who forever changed our understanding of the limits of the possible. 70 years later, their identities remain unknown, their capabilities unexplained, their motives obscure. One truth remains: on that rainy afternoon in Bridgeport, humanity discovered it was not alone, and that some truths come with a terrible price. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. If you find these mysteries as compelling as we do, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more explorations into the unknown. We'll see you in the next one.